And then we're starting here. We've got the
Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of York, the 22nd largest club in the world and a club that opens opportunities to the community and the world. I am President-elect Jackie Summers, filling in for President Andrak, who had a work commitment and couldn't be with us. Steve Feldman will virtually lead the opening song, America the Beautiful, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and also the invocation.
Rotarians, please join me. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in a word of prayer. O Creator of the universe, the God whom we call by many names, I try to be grateful in all things, and today I am reminded to be grateful that I lost the election last November, for it is the winners and not me who get to deal with COVID-19 and racial injustice on their agenda month in and month out. Lord, be with them in their struggles. And yet here we are again in the next election cycle. And we call upon you today to be with us and with the candidates for elective office in November in our struggles. We ask you to fill our candidates with wisdom, discernment, eloquence, and energy. We pray that they will be inspired to listen to all and speak with all. We pray that they will, with Francis of Assisi, be inspired to seek love and not hatred, pardon and not injury, union and not discord, hope and not despair. Bring these values to us in this Rotary Club. Press us to place service above self. Guide us toward kindness toward self and then kindness toward others. And grant us peace, everyone. Amen.
Thank you, Steve. So this is our very first in-person hybrid meeting since March 11. And it's an experiment. So we give a lot of credit to our technical experts, Ben Hott, Chris Talk, Courtney Bailey, who are making this possible. So while there are only 25 of us in this room today, there are hopefully hundreds watching virtually for this meeting. And we hope that this is the beginning of many more meetings that we'll be able to bring our Rotarians back to, because as you know, fellowship is such a critically important component of our club. Our deepest sympathy to Rotarian Jake Miller upon the passing of his wife Arlene on August 27th. They were married 54 years, and the service will be held tomorrow, September 23rd at New Fairview Church. You can see the obituary for the details. The fundraising committee will meet on Friday at 7:30 a.m. via Zoom, and the Preserve Planet Earth Committee will meet next Wednesday, September 9th at 7:30 a.m. via Zoom as well. So Ann asked me to fill in today, and already I've been here such a short time, I've already failed, because I have to tell you, since I've been standing here, we have fallen in the world ranking by a spot. So I don't know if she did that deliberately or if she didn't know, but I'm unfortunately the bearer of that news that we have apparently officially gone down a spot from the 22nd largest club in the world to the 23rd largest club in the world. We'll fight that. We'll really look under the hood and see if that's true, but right now that's what we're told we are facing. So even though all the obvious reasons, our call to action to you is this: please encourage potential members to take a look at our weekly meetings virtually. We do a great job. Past President Mike and the program committee have brought some outstanding programs to you. Today is no exception at all. Great program. And so we want to encourage others to take a look at what we have. And I also encourage you to be really active with our committees, because that's where a lot of the magic happens. That's where you really observe service events. So please encourage your fellow Rotarians to get more actively involved, and please encourage new members to come along as well. In the interest of time, we will not have a business spotlight today or the poll. We'll resume that again next week. However, we do have a live and in-person fundraising announcement by our very own in the flesh, past President Mike King.
Thank you, soon to be President Jackie. I'm here on behalf of the fundraising committee, to talk about our fundraising event that's coming up next week, the week after Monday, and to urge your participation in that event if you have not already signed up. This is our most significant fundraising event for the year. It is an event in which over the last 19 years, we have raised almost $500,000 and then awarded those funds to various community groups as we saw and tried to meet those needs. This year, those recipients are the Kiwanis Lake Restoration Project, is a very brand new project for us. The York City Little League, which is a long-standing project that we've been for probably more than 10 to 12 years. A third recipient is the Bearcat Interact Club at York High, also a new recipient, and also a child care scholarship program. Needless to say, it's been a challenging year for all of us on all fronts, particularly for our fundraising committee. We worked very hard dealing with the complications of the pandemic, countless meetings, countless emails, but I'm pleased to say that I believe that we are prepared now for a successful fundraiser. With the exception, I'll get to this at the very end, we need significantly more participation in order to achieve our goal. So if you are not already signed up as a sponsor or a golfer or a tennis player, or a croquet player, or a bag tosser, please do that immediately. There are also opportunities for volunteering with registration, monitoring on course activities, beverage cart drivers, and other miscellaneous tasks. And we ask that you contact Bert or Jan Gugno May to indicate your interest in that. Finally, if you are not able to participate in any other way, please at least show up for the dinner, bring a guest if you can, and that'll also give you an opportunity to participate in the auctions. The auctions will be a bit different this year because of the circumstances. The details of that will be provided to you early next week. But the short story is that all bidding will be done via cell phone, which means that everyone can participate, whether they are in attendance in reality or they are in attendance virtually. So it will be a little different, but we will explain that process to you. And there are a number of very interesting items on the auction list. Last but certainly not least, I want to assure everyone that all appropriate precautions are being observed by our committee and by the country club. After several months of shutdown, the club has been operating safely and successfully for a number of months, including hosting numerous golf and wedding events with significant numbers of people, and successfully doing that while following all CDC and state health department guidelines. I don't know if the lack of signups at this point in time is related to that. I suspect that it may be, but I want to assure everyone that we have done everything that possibly can be done. And I do not believe that there is any, as a practical matter, that there's any real risk associated with that. So in closing, this is, I want to be very clear, this is in the nature of an SOS message that I'm sending out to all our members, the few members that are here with me in the room and the numerous members that are watching this online. We need more participation. We particularly need more golfers, and we need more diners. And the more diners we have, the more bidders we have in the auction process. So this is a time for all of us to do what we do as Rotarians, and that is step up. We have a long history of identifying and meeting needs in the community. That's what we do, and we need to follow through on that commitment. So please join us for that event. Thank you.
Thank you, Past President Mike. Now on to our program. Our program today will feature Congressman Scott Perry representing the 10th Congressional District, and he'll be joined by past Rotary Club President Mike Summers to have a conversation about the upcoming congressional race. Scott Perry was first elected to represent Pennsylvania's 4th Congressional District in 2012, succeeding Todd Platts. In 2018, due to redistricting, Perry now represents the 10th Congressional District, and he's seeking his 5th term in Congress. Prior to serving in Congress, Scott was a small business owner. He also served in the Pennsylvania State House of Representatives, and he is a retired Brigadier General from the Pennsylvania National Guard. Scott and his wife Christy live in Dillsburg, where they're raising their 2 beautiful daughters. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please welcome past President Mike Summers and Congressman Scott Perry.
So different for us, Scott. Normally I have a couple hundred people in the room, so our applause is a little different than tradition. Our social distancing is doing just fine. I'm sure there's lots of applause in people's homes and their businesses greeting you. We'll be having 2 conversations with the candidates for the 10th Congressional District, spanning 2 Rotary program dates, which is taking place of our traditional fall debate, as our 2 candidates could not find a common date to appear together. Traditionally, York County has been part of 1 congressional district, and due to its size, we have approximately 450,000 people as far as our population, making York County traditionally the dominant portion of a congressional district, as each congressional district represents approximately 750,000 people, so that would come out to about 60%. In 2018, redistricting occurred, and for the first time, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court drew the boundaries and divided York County into 2 congressional districts, cutting the county more or less in half and potentially altering the county's influence in congressional races. There's a slide showing you what the 10th congressional district looks like. The 11th congressional district covers most of the southern half of York County, and it will feature Lloyd Smucker, who is a Republican incumbent, who is being challenged by Sarah Hammonds, who's a Democrat from Hanover. York County only makes up about 26% of that district, with Lancaster making up the rest. The 10th congressional district covers the northern half of York County, with York County representing about 33% of the district, along with parts of Cumberland representing 30%, and Dauphin County being the majority or plurality with 37% of the votes. The race for the 10th features incumbent Congressman Scott Perry. He's a Republican from Dillsburg in the northern part of York County, against Pennsylvania Auditor General Eugene D. Pasquale, a Democrat from the West York area. The district contains the cities of York and Harrisburg now, and several large municipalities like Hershey and Carlisle, but lots of suburbs and farmland in between. So it's a very diverse constituency. We will hold 2 conversations with the candidates for the 10th congressional seat. The first being with Scott Perry today, and the second will be on October 7th with Eugene B. Pasquale. And I also would like to thank our fellow Rotarians who submitted approximately 100 different questions for the two candidates. That makes my job much, much easier. Our goal is to get to know each of the candidates on a personal level and find out a little more about how they represent Central Pennsylvania in Congress. And as mentioned, our first guest is incumbent Scott Perry. Scott, welcome to Rotary.
Well, thank you. It's always my honor to be here with you. And well, 22nd is, or whatever the number is first in my heart. It's always been a thrill to come and see all the folks I do lament the lack of everybody being present, but I understand you're here online, so I'm gratified to be here. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity.
Good. And I'm going to ask all of us to give Scott a round of applause, because that's going to be the last time we're going to make any comments or applause during this until we get to the end. So let's welcome Scott. Scott's been our guest multiple times as candidate through the debates, and along with many, many times as our sitting congressman. We do appreciate, Scott, you taking the time out of your very busy schedule, particularly in this election season, to take time to address us, our members, and the broader public overall. Having said, I'd like to get to know each of the candidates a little bit better. I think knowing where somebody comes from is very helpful from the standpoint of how they represent us in Congress. So Scott, I believe you have a very unique backstory, and I'd like you just maybe to talk a little bit about your family background and what it was like growing up.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's always kind of fun to talk about yourself a little bit, but you do need to know what kind of informs my decisions. And my kind of journey starts with my mom, who's a hero to me, back in the time when she was raising two young boys on her own, and she left her father that was abusing her. And when I say left, she was fleeing him, and my father, my brother's father, who was abusing her. And she moved. Just our first location was on Berry Hill Street in Harrisburg, but still with a lot of people around, and she was worried that she would be found. You got to remember, this is back in the late 60s. And so she moved us to a place, house in Dillsburg, no running water, no electricity, took our baths in a big steel tub out on the back porch out of a pump that you went like this to. And you know, at 6.5 years old, I found myself on the end of a 2-man saw with my brother, 4 years older than me, cut wood for that winter for to heat the house, which didn't have any insulation, by the way. And you know, my mom worked tirelessly, multiple jobs to provide for her family. And at that time, for a period of time, she had a job where she couldn't have kids. They wouldn't allow it, if you can imagine that in this day and age. But if you can just imagine this, she would take an ad out in the paper that she had these 2 young men to board while she was traveling. And she would just take us to a place, and that's where we lived for a period of time. And, you know, we had some very, we'll just say, interesting experiences with that. But, you know, the great thing is that while I didn't have a lot of direction, once I got myself through high school, which I characterized it that way, without any direction, without a dad, it can be kind of difficult. Mom's away working and so on and so forth. I decided I'd join the military. I started out as a private, as Mike said. At some point, went to officer candidate school, got commissioned, and worked my way up through the ranks. Went to flight school, and the culmination of my career is probably my tour in Iraq, commanding a task force of about 800 to 1,000 souls from all branches of the Army, and flying, you know, I don't know, 200 combat hours myself over the size of the state of Georgia. And it, you know, of course, like I said, proceeded up the ranks from there and retired recently as a brigadier general. On the other side of my life, I put myself through college. I went to HAC, which is a great school, and then got myself into Penn State and wanted to start a business and see what that's like. And for people that don't know what that's like, and they always think, well, people that own businesses are wealthy and they can do whatever they want to with their time. And I would encounter people, and they would say, well, you have your own business. You own your own business. And I'd say, well, my business owns me. You never stop worrying about the payroll and the insurance and the taxes and where your people show up, and is the equipment going to work, and the receivables, and going and getting more work, and so on and so forth. And I look at our situation today at the struggles that businesses are making, and businesses provide dreams. the fulfillment of dreams for their employees, their car payments, their education and their mortgage payments. And so I think about that both as from an employee standpoint, because my first job was picking fruit at Ashcombe Farm. There was a lot of fighting in my house between the stepdad at that time and my mom, and I just needed to get out. I was 13 and I could ride my bike to this place. I didn't have any skills, 13 years old, but I could show up on time with a good attitude. And, you know, from there, other work, I worked at a farm, and then in high school, I went to Votech for auto mechanics, and I got a job in a garage. And all those things kind of inform me about your attitude and what makes a difference. And part of that, Mike, and to all of you, is what motivated me to run for this position in the first place, is love for my country. I am focused on two things in my life: my family and my country. And I've seen things in my lifetime I feel slip away, become less. It's been less opportunity. My wife and I have two little girls, as Jackie said, and we're concerned about their future. And so every single day, that's what I'm focused on. And while I watched Tim Scott at the recent convention, he said in a generation, in a lifetime, his family went from picking cotton to Congress. Now, it's not as glorious. I went from the outhouse to Congress, but but that's the promise of America. And I want every single person to have that across our district, our Commonwealth, and our country. And that's my focus every single day.
Excellent. And again, I think that American Dream story, which is replicated by multiple members in Congress, but it's really what the framers had in mind, I think, which is to have people close to the population. That's one of them. And certainly American Dream story, as far as your background, as far as what you've ascended to, as far as congressman. One thing you didn't mention was that you had served in the State House for 3 terms, and you were at the same time in the National Guard serving in Iraq. So I'm sure the State House gave you an opportunity to start cutting your teeth as far as legislation. And I believe your opponent was there at the same time, which I find really interesting.
We came in together, into the State House together, so we're well familiar with each other.
That's good. And I want to then shift that part to thanking you, A, for your service in the military. Very long time, 40 years. But I'm interested in what that military experience has brought to the table as far as going to Congress.
Well, what it brings to the table for me is look, we all have our opinions, and in the military, you learn to take orders. So you have a different viewpoint about how we can complete the mission. And certainly the military encourages you, regardless of your rank. If you've got something to say, raise your hand, salute, what have you, and say, sir, ma'am, what about this? Or why can't we do it this way? Or why is this happening that way? At the end of the day, the person in charge says, well, I appreciate the input, but this is the way we're going to do it. And you say, Roger, and you salute and move out. And with that, you meet people from all walks of life, of different opinions and different capabilities, but you are focused on the mission that you have to complete. And you get past all your differences of whatever they might be, of age, of where your geography, your socioeconomic background. You are focused on your mission, and you have to be able to work on a team to get that done. At the same time, you cannot compromise. There are certain things in the military. The military is a very standard issue-oriented organization, and there's no compromising of certain standards, whether it's how you comport yourself, your uniform, or the standards of the conduct of the mission. And so within those strict guidelines, you are focused on your mission. You are working on a team. You all have to pull together. You put away your differences, and you get the job done. And I kind of look at Congress as an opportunity to do that as well. There's a lot of different folks there, as you know, from all different backgrounds. And if you listen to them, you can understand why they feel the way they do, why they vote for and against the things they do. Their stories, their lives are compelling them just as mine has me. They're bosses, they're constituents. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means they see things differently. So you don't take it personally any more than you do in the military. They've got their mission and you've got yours. And the great thing I think about America, at least up until this point, we've been able to, we're an imperfect union and we're always striving for perfection. We've been able to work those differences out together without violence, without harsh rhetoric. But things seem to be changing. That concerns me greatly. And, but you do learn that in the military, and it's a great force multiplier.
I mentioned when you were representing the 4th Congressional District, you had basically the city of York, and then you had a lot of suburbs and farmlands, and now you've picked up the other municipality, the capital city.
I have the 4th included the city of Harrisburg.
Oh, didn't I?
Absolutely, yes.
My question, which is probably less relevant now,
Oh, okay.
is from the standpoint of the change of the district, has that changed your approach as far as government? So as it's morphed a little bit north, has that changed how you approach representing the district?
Well, I will say that I think there's two different personalities from one side of the river to the other. Believe it or not, there just kind of is. If you go to Derry Township over towards Hershey, it's a little different than the city of York, but even the city of York sees things differently than the city of Harrisburg. So I've always kind of, had to deal with those differences and speak to those differences. And I think I've done it fairly effectively. It makes it very difficult. If you can imagine trying to represent Steelton and then Yo or Stewartstown. This is very, very different. And in my opinion, I think the district was drawn that way particularly, so it is difficult. That's politics. That's how it goes. But I think you can do that effectively by just being transparent and open and being there. So what's different now, of course, is look, if you go down to Stouts Church from Dillsburg, that's a long drive. It's also a long drive up to Halifax and Gretz. I'm used to making those drives, but you got to be present, and it makes it a little more difficult now just because of the geography to be everywhere that you have to be. And but we do that, and we're present, and we I tell people what I stand for, and I tell them why I stand for it. And let's face it, we don't always agree. We don't always agree, but that's okay. But I tell them why I have this position, and I offer and I ask them to give me their opinions on why that should be otherwise. But I have to do what I think is best for the district, for the majority of the people in the district, for a commonwealth in our country. And I take in all the information, and that's what I do. It does make it a little more challenging for sure, Mike, and there are competing interests in that regard. But you got to understand, those folks that don't live right in the community where you live are concerned about their country and their well-being too, and you have to be there for them.
You serve on 2 congressional committees, the Transportation and Infrastructure and Foreign Affairs. Can you briefly tell us what each of those committees kind of represent, which you find more satisfying as far as in your work, and which may have the most impact in the district?
Well, of course, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, probably many in the room are very, very familiar. We are an old state. We have a lot of old infrastructure. As you know, for many years, we've been talking about our deficient bridges across the Commonwealth. And if you drive on the roads and the bumps and so on and so forth, you know that I'm sure you have your own complaints about that. So there's a lot of work, whether it's the bridges and the roads or anything else in Pennsylvania regarding infrastructure. What people maybe don't realize is it covers everything about infrastructure. It covers our ports, it covers our rails, our airports, our broadband cable, water, sewer, telephone, all those things. And it's complicated, it's ever moving. And if you didn't know this, just like running for Congress, you have to run for those committee assignments. And as a previous mechanical contractor who also served on the Consumer Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives of the state, I thought to be on the Infrastructure Committee because it's something I'm interested in. I think it's something our district and our Commonwealth is interested in. We have a lot of needs, and I could do a lot of good for the people of York County and the whole 10th district. And so that's what the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is about. Of course, Foreign Affairs. It's the baby the sister to the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We deal with foreign policy at the federal level. So our relationship with somebody like our good ally Israel, or our relationship with our adversary Iran or China. I will tell you, I find them both very, very gratifying committees. I am very active in both of them. I was on 3 committees for some time, which is kind of an anomaly. I was also on Homeland Security, and I was a subcommittee chairman. I'm active on all my committees. I write a lot of bills, do a lot of legislation in all committees, And believe it or not, even foreign affairs affects your county, certainly. In the 10th district, certainly transportation and infrastructure, broadband cable, our roadways, our multimodal facilities in the district are all impacted. If you've been through Mount Rose for the past couple of years, you know what I'm talking about, and my frustration in trying to.
When is that going to be finished? When we're taking up poll from any of our speakers as far as when that might.
I'm going to defer to my good friend, the Appropriations Chairman, Mr. Saylor. I think he's probably got a better answer on that than I do. But even foreign affairs, you have things like the BDS movement. If you're not familiar with the boycott, divest, and sanction movement against Israel, we've got a very strong and vibrant Jewish population in central Pennsylvania. And, you know, I'm a person who is a student of history. I love that stuff. I grew up with a lot of Vietnam era veterans that I trained with, and of course I was enamored with World War II veterans and Korean War veterans. But the horrors of the past can't be revisited. And so when I see things like that occurring in our community, I'm very vocal about it. I'm out front about it, and I take a position on it. And I know some people disagree with me about that, but I think as a leader in our community that has asked for the privilege of this position, that I need to take positions and then lead the way and stand by that. And so those are just a couple of examples.
Sure. My good friend who unfortunately passed away, Bill Goodling, our previous congressman, he always said that being the minority stinks. And he had the good fortune as he was winding down his career being the majority. So I'd like you just to briefly talk about what the difference is as far as being the majority or the minority, and how it affects your ability to do your job.
Well, it has a great effect. Of course, the big difference between being in the majority and being in the minority is the majority party sets the calendar, the legislative calendar. So even though I might want to talk about solutions for Mount Rose Avenue, and I have offered amendments and so on and so forth, if the Transportation Committee Chairman is not going to run a bill and not going to hear my amendment, we can't move forward. And I want to represent my citizens, my bosses, as well as the next person. And so the big deal with having the majority is that you get to set the legislative calendar. And when you're out of the minority, you're essentially begging for the scraps, what you might be able to get. You're trying to make a deal where you can, and you can make some deals. You can make some deals that are good for your district, but it makes it exceedingly difficult and frustrating. And I will tell you, during this 1.5-year session, most of my frustration is that we've spent our time doing what we call messaging bills. And this is probably inside baseball, but a messaging bill is exactly what it sounds like. It's never intended to go anywhere. When I say go anywhere, we'll pass it out of committee. We'll pass it out of the House. But they know it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate. They know there's never going to be a presidential signature. It's never going to become law. But it's for messaging in the next campaign. And so, for instance, one that you might be hearing about now, HR 2, the infrastructure bill. It was essentially the Green New Deal, if you're familiar with that. And I'm an infrastructure guy, so we're trying to find a way. We have a president that wants to build stuff. We're trying to find a way to improve our community. But it was a Green New Deal with broadband cable thrown in, with rural broadband cable. Now, you know, we desperately need rural broadband cable in this area and all of South Central Pennsylvania. So that's the one good thing. But the larger portion of the bill just could not be, I mean, it passed, but on completely partisan lines for obvious reasons. There were, and quite honestly, if you look at that bill, there were literally hundreds of Democrat amendments too, because that bill never came through committee where we discussed it. Can we add this? What do you think of that? That bill came from leadership, from Speaker Pelosi to the committee. And even after we had the markup where we put things in and take things out, they added $1 trillion and 1,400 pages after the fact between the time it went from committee to the week later when we voted on it. So now you're hearing is Perry doesn't support rural broadband cable because they voted no on the bill. Sometimes you have to vote no on process. Sometimes you vote no on substance. Sometimes it's a little of both. In this position, I'm always looking for, is this better than what we have now? Is this an improvement? Even though it's slight, because I will tell you folks, and you probably get this, nothing is like, well, this is obviously better. If it was obviously better, these would be easy votes and anybody would be doing this. These are always, it's just slightly better. And you you have to eat a sandwich that you don't necessarily like if you want to get the rest of the meal. And sometimes it's not. And so that's a huge frustration about being in the minority. You know, I went to one of our big economic suppliers here in the district, and a personal friend came to me shortly after the COVID shutdown in Pennsylvania and said, we are going to have a liability issue. And we went through it together. And I said, you're absolutely right. And I went to the majority chairman on the Judiciary Committee where that would be heard. And I laid out this scenario for him. And I said, do you think there's something we can do? Because this is happening all across the country. This is a Democrat, this is a Republican, liberal, conservative. This is everybody. And he said, we're not going to take that up. Now, if you look at it, and that was back in the springtime, Senator McConnell said no other COVID relief is going to move unless liability protection is in there. I will tell you, if we were in the majority in the House, that bill would have already moved.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a couple of statistics, and then we'll get to an actual question.
Okay.
So the domestic population of the U.S. is around 330 million, and our economy is a $19.5 trillion gross domestic product. Our original federal budget was set for 4.8 trillion, with a planned deficit approaching $1 trillion. But in March, COVID pandemic, and our economy went into a freeze, and Congress authorized an additional $2.4 trillion due to the COVID crisis, producing, as of the end of last month, so the first 10 months, a $2.8 trillion deficit, ballooning our cumulative national debt by additional 10%. No doubt the extra spending has dramatically helped bridge us through some really awful short-term outcomes. Your thoughts on that process?
Well, I will tell you, at the time, you have to put yourself in the time. We can always Monday morning quarterback it months later, but at that moment where we saw what was happening in other countries and we saw COVID starting to spread across our country and indeed in our Commonwealth, we didn't know enough. We just didn't know enough, and we were very concerned about the health and safety of all Americans and quite honestly the world's population as well. And so we proceeded with insufficient information. But at that time, and in this sense, generally speaking, when the government takes from you, and the government at that point had taken from all of us by shutting us out of our businesses and in many cases out of our livelihoods, the government has to, it's no different than eminent domain, taking by eminent domain your physical property. I saw it as no different. And so while I lamented the numbers, Mike, and I did, and it was imperfect, all those bills had imperfections that I disagreed with. And I will give you one shining example, which is the $600 pandemic unemployment compensation or assistance pool, as we kind of for short call the federal level. We knew that was going to be a problem, and even the Senate realized it when after they had written the bill and the House had weighed in, and we said this is going to be a problem, and they sought to go back and rectify that. And when they sought to go back and rectify it, the deal had already been made. And so on a partisan level, unfortunately, we couldn't change that. It was a vote, but it was rejected on a partisan basis. And so we had to go forward. And so I had to accept for the greater purpose, the $600 pandemic unemployment assistance if I wanted the rest of it, realizing that the federal government and state governments were literally taking people's livelihoods away from them for the greater good as we understood it at that time. Now, anybody that knows me, and folks have been critical of me ever since I was at the state level or the federal level, is that I am probably what's considered a budget hawk. I think we spend way beyond our means, and I'm concerned about our future to continue to do that. And you talked about the deficit and the debt numbers, and you can find that I am my own man, regardless of who's the president, regardless of which party is in charge. That when it comes to that fiscal responsibility, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say something. I'm going to do something with the one vote out of 435 that I had. At that time, when that was happening, I didn't see any other choice, and I thought it was the best choice to support those bills and those provisions, even though they weren't perfect, because we were besetting this on our citizens, and they needed some kind of lifeline to keep their families and their businesses and this economy going. It's been imperfect, but could have been a lot worse.
Sure. And I think hopefully most people would agree that it was a very unique time. But nevertheless, the government doesn't actually have any money.
Right. Yeah, but people ask me, you're absolutely right. Well, where are we borrowing it from? Folks, we're printing it. There's no bank to go borrow that much money from. Mike, you mentioned those numbers, but remember the additional borrowing or printing that we authorized the Federal Reserve, which doubles that yet even again.
Yes. All right, so as of July, we had 147, almost 148 million people employed in the US. But we had 16.2 million, I've heard as high as 26, maybe underemployed, but 16.2 million unemployed, which is 10.2%. If we went back to February, we were at all-time lows really at 3.5%. So this brings me to the next question, which is, I want to add in, I mentioned this to Scott at the table. This is probably the craziest statistic I've seen in the last couple of weeks, which is out of young millennials, which are defined as age 24 to 29, 39% of those young millennials are either back at home or plan on moving back. So I think these are people that have been out of school for 6, 7, 8, 10 years, who are running their own lives, and all of a sudden the rug was pulled out. So that's a good backdrop to say, we're in very unique times. But this is the question. So we have the House, which passed the HEROES Act. Yes, perhaps you didn't vote for that, but we'll find out. At 3.4 trillion, and reportedly the Senate and President Trump are offering up to $1 trillion additional dollars to try to bridge us through to the next part. Your thoughts on that next stage of the COVID?
Well, I think that it's necessary, and in Pennsylvania in particular, our economic straits have been worse than some other states. If you look at the federal amount of unemployment assistance that's going out among all the 50 states, Pennsylvania, even though they're the 5th largest state, is at the top of that. But that's very telling about what our experience has been. Now, whether I agree or disagree with the governor in that instance, or whether any of us do, our citizens, whether they're employees or employers, are suffering under that circumstance. And so I think that the federal government wants to be responsive. What the federal government doesn't want to do, I think, is to encourage poor decision-making at any state level. And I think that rightly so, they're concerned about paying for it, making all citizens pay for past sins of individual states. And I would just point to the pension situation in Pennsylvania. It was a problem to be solved when I was in the state legislature, and it hasn't gotten much better since then. And so it would be unfair. It would be unfair to make Pennsylvania citizens pay for Illinois, New York's, or California's pension problem, just like on the flip side of that. So I think they're trying to find that middle ground, and I think that middle ground probably includes extended PPP for the business. You look at our entertainment and restaurant industry. You look at the transportation, the local bus companies that are on the very verge, and their houses are on the line right now. That's what I think, and had been left out of the way previously in some respects compared to other transportation industries. That's what I envision where we should be looking at, and of course the liability protection. So it's increased PPP, additional unemployment, but I think we should cap that, and I've signed on to this, where you shouldn't make more on unemployment than you do working. That seems pretty reasonable to me, right? But we understand people are out of work, and then the liability protection. So a business can't get going if they're concerned about lawsuits and defending lawsuits, just because somebody walked into the store and then went home and said, your employee gave me COVID, and then you have to go and fight to prove that.
The second major part of 2020 is social unrest due to deaths, injuries, and questions of equality. George Floyd, Jacob Blake, unrest, marches, protests, social justice, riots, Black Lives Matter, all are in the news every single day. It seems like almost every week we unfortunately hear about another situation involving our law enforcement. So here's the question. Do you see systemic racism in our society? And if so, where? And what do you think as a member of Congress you can do?
So when you talk about the term systemic, that means to me that it is orchestrated. That means that there's a collaborative approach to accomplish something. And I will tell you, in my experience in my life was in the military, as an employee, as an employer, I have not experienced that. I have not seen that. That's not to say, Mike, or anybody else that racism and bigotry doesn't exist in our country. Clearly, it does. I want to espouse the great portions of our Constitution that say that every person, every man, woman, and child in America, regardless of color, creed, religion, economic status, where you're from, geographic, everybody, we are created equal in the eyes of the Lord, and we are equal under the law. And I think that's what has to guide us as a member of Congress, as an individual, but certainly as a member of Congress. I think how I comport myself in that regard is important. I do see myself, whether I like to on occasion or not. Sometimes, I feel like going to the grocery store with ratty jeans on and old shoes and a torn t-shirt. But I know I'm probably going to see one of my bosses at the store, and they're going to have a small child with them, and they're going to say, well, there goes our congressman. He sure doesn't look like it. So there's a certain duty that comes with this to comport yourself in a way that is indicative of what you hope the better angels in society would wish for you and all of us. And so from my standpoint, I try to live my life and in public exactly that way and be a leader in that regard. So it means toning down the rhetoric and trying not to incite those kind of activities, that kind of behavior, and to try and work towards solutions that serve our everybody in the community on both sides, understanding that some people definitely have grievances, but America is the place where we have a system in place where we can solve them politely, with comedy towards one another, and with love towards one another as neighbors. And so that's my piece.
Good, very good. How do we balance the misuse and abuse of the police force with the understanding that policing is a critical function within our society? So we all know that most of our police officers are fine people. And we also know that unfortunately in any organization, you get a couple of people that might be bad apples. How do we resolve that?
First of all, I think we just have to always keep the conversation going. And I've been honored to speak with most of our police chiefs across the district as these events have occurred across the country to get their input. I'm not a law enforcement officer, but I will tell you, I have consummate respect for those who walk out of their front door every day, not knowing if they're ever going to walk back in. And as a person who's been honored to serve in combat, that's one thing when you're completely focused on it 24 hours a day. But these folks have to come home, put that aside, be with their loved ones and their family members, and then the next day or the next shift, have to put that face on and go out and face really uncertain moments every day of their life, and they fear for their lives on many occasions. So to me, the vast majority of police officer and law enforcement are doing the right thing and want to do the right thing. And some get, there's always, we don't throw a bushel of apples out because there might be one bad one in there. We go through the apples and make sure that we deal with the bad one correctly. And so I think there are some reforms. We voted on the bill, and I can't remember exactly the name of it at the moment, but I voted in favor of the Tim Scott bill. But prior to that, I talked to all our law enforcement agencies in the district, or not all of them, but most of them, to get their input. And I went through the list of things that were in the bill. And understand, policing is a local function. It's a state local function. It's not really supposed to be, in a general sense, the purview of the federal government. So we have, if you raise your right hand and swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, there are strong federal limitations to policing. So my point is to make sure that what I was voting for and on was the right thing in the people's minds that were having to do it, and it was going to make a difference. Now, the good news is that most of the tenants in there, like you pick one in particular that most people are familiar with, chokeholds. Our law enforcement agencies in the 10th Congressional District don't do that now. So passing that at the federal level of prohibition wasn't really going to affect our law enforcement agencies here. But I think we do need an ongoing conversation, and I think we do need strong protections for the one bad that gets out there on the street and is going to do the wrong thing. But the other thing I want to say, and I think this is really important, is that when we see these things, and just like all of you, I was horrified at watching the police officer for minute after minute with his neck on George Floyd's neck. I was horrified by that. But as usual, there's always more to the story that we don't know about. And so we have to be very careful, even though it looks like something is to reserve judgment until we have all the facts. Because remember, in America, one of the great things is we are all presumed innocent until we are found guilty, and we want to preserve that. We want to make sure that that remains.
So we're unfortunate, the clock is just flying here. I got so many more things, so we'll try to just get a quick one in here. Masks,
Yeah.
good idea.
I think what I'm concerned about is yeah, I think they can obviously be helpful, but I get concerned because we keep on moving the goalposts, and I think it's hard for people to kind of keep up with this. I've been privileged to talk to our school superintendents who had to put a plan together. They've been working tirelessly, their staffs, since this whole thing started all summer long, didn't get a summer break. And they didn't get much guidance, in my opinion, from the administration at the state. And they put a plan together, and parents put a plan together based on the school district's plan. And then at the last minute, right before everybody's ready to go, this mask mandate comes. And so to me, that's moving the goalposts. And I understand if it's because we have further and new information. I get it. And if we do, I think it's fair for us as citizens to say, well, let's see that information that compels this decision that we all have to abide by. But if I'm 6 feet, do I have to wear the mask or not? And if it's 7 feet or 8 feet, but now it started out as 6 feet or a mask, now it's 6 feet plus a mask. I would like to see the metrics behind this, and I think we have to be really transparent with our citizens who have to deal with this and their family members and so on and so forth. And then you have, I deal with people that come into the office that have medical conditions that preclude them from wearing a mask. So now, because of HIPAA, you can't ask them, and so they go to the store, or they try to go to the store. The store owner then is put in a position of being the police officer, or they get a health inspector violation, and then the patron who has a health condition that's not wearing a mask gets in an altercation with somebody else in the store that is saying, well, you're imperiling me. There's a lot of misinformation and insufficient information regarding masks, regarding distancing, regarding all kinds of things. And it would be great if we could get all on the same page with that.
Okay, I thought that was going to be a little shorter.
Sorry.
That's fine. You're obviously passionate. That's great. Let's move on to Social Security. And so I have a nice paragraph, but I'm going to cut to the chase because I know you know the numbers, which is Social Security benefits are currently being expected to be depleted by 2035. And then at that point, Social Security will be able to pay out 79% ongoing, unless there's some changes. We also have President Trump, who is through executive order putting out a tax holiday, which the funding goes into the system for Social Security and for disability. So my question is, is tax holiday a good idea, first of all, because I know they would like to just make it go away, be forgiven at some point. And also, what's Congress doing as far as the funding, the shortfall that's coming in 15 years, which is coming up very quickly?
Okay, so let's talk about the tax holiday first of all. So it is a holiday, but it's for a finite period of time. And just like your mortgage that might be held in advance, or your rent that's held in advance under either state or federal provisions, it means that you don't have to pay it right now while times are tough, while you might not be employed, but it doesn't mean you don't owe the money at some point. And so it's the same thing with Social Security or your payroll withholding. So it allows you to keep more of your money right now while you're trying to keep your business alive, while you're keeping your home in financial sound straits. But you have to realize at some point next year, under the current provisions, that's going to have to be paid back, because we can't imperil Social Security or any of the other things that we've made obligations that we have to pay for. Now, what's Congress doing to fix this? Unfortunately, neither side has been very willing to have this discussion. I have signed on to bills in the past, but they haven't gotten any traction where we try and extend the life of Social Security. But one of the best things that we can do, and we were on course not to completely fix the Social Security windfall, because as you know, if you're a student of arithmetic, the numbers just don't add up based on how it was originally envisioned. You have more people taking out than putting in on a pro rata share, and those numbers just don't work out. But the one thing that does help stem that tide is a growing and robust economy. And up until February or so, we had the best economy, certainly in my lifetime. And as I look around the room, probably almost all of our lifetimes. That means more people earning more and paying in more. And that's the one thing that we can do that causes no one to any shortfall or any pain. And that's what I think at a minimum, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, my goodness, we should be able to agree on that.
Okay, we're probably going to be on our last question. I'm going to let you close a little bit. But I want to switch to foreign affairs just because you serve on that committee. It's certainly important overall. And the one thing that slide that may be up coming up is just showing that the United States puts out about $732 billion towards defense spending. And then the next 10 countries add up to about the same. So we're very dominant as far as what we put towards national defense, without a doubt. And with this backdrop, I just want to ask who you think our biggest adversaries are, and should we be competing against them? Should we be trying to coexist? You know, what's the approach?
Well, in my opinion, and I think it's been borne out, and I think most Americans are now seeing it for what it is China. And let me just make the distinction. The citizens of China are distinct from the Communist Party and the leadership of China, but they are an adversary that unfortunately our own government has been duping its citizens about, and maybe itself about for essentially my whole lifetime, but at least the last 4 years, to the point where we've actually been helping China become our greatest viable adversary. And we have just been reluctant because of our very close ties economically, especially since their transition into the World Trade Organization, to hold their feet to the fire. And while you're right, we do spend huge amount on defense, but our goal has always been, as a service member, we knew we were going to have to fight outnumbered and win. We knew we were going to have to fight outnumbered and win. And you look at the size of China and China's military, that certainly is the case if we're going to get into a, and hopefully we don't, but get into an altercation with them. The way we do that is by having superior training, superior technology, superior equipment. And that costs a lot of money. Of course, the Chinese have been stealing it and reproducing it and coming and even surpassing parity with us on a number of occasions. So I think that America has finally awakened to the Communist Chinese Party and their visions for the United States. Make no doubt about it. They wish us to be second-class citizens under communist rule, one way or the other, and that is their goal. And we simply cannot let that happen. We can't let the biggest beacon of freedom in the globe be extinguished by a communist oppressive government that still currently puts their people in concentration camps, uses a system of social credits to direct their behaviors in their homes and their thoughts. That's something that sounds Orwellian because it is. And so certainly Russia, Iran, North Korea are out there, but comparative to China, they're really big players. And if we do if we have the right policies in place, especially with Russia and Iran, we could solve those, I think, fairly without a lot of undue burden. Let's put it like that.
Okay, I'm going to give you the last question I got last night at like 11 o'clock when I said that all questions would be due like a month ago. Anyway, why should we reelect you? 2 minutes left.
Look, I'll leave that up in the hands of the voters to decide. I always want to be and comport myself as a humble person, but again, I'll just go back to my first statement. I'm focused on two things in my life. It is my family and it is my country, and I spend all my time invested in those two things. So you won't find me traveling, going on golf outings, or you will find me working, or you will find me at home. You will know that the positions I take, and you will know why I take them. You will know that I'm open. And when I'm wrong, that I'll admit I'm wrong. I am flawed like everybody else, but I do my best every single day. You will know that I am my own man. Party politics is a rough and tumble enterprise. I get that. But whether it's my side or the other side, I've been one of the few people that has been willing to stand out there and be courageous enough and say, this isn't right for our country, our community, our commonwealth, and take the hits for that, whether it's voting against budgets, whether it's voting against my own speaker. And as you know, that is a very difficult thing to do in Washington, D.C. My orders, as a guy who spent almost 40 years in the military, and as I had to tell my speaker at some point, my orders don't come from Washington, D.C. My orders come from right here in now what is the 10th district, and I am honored every day to serve, and I will continue to do that as long as people feel that's appropriate for me to do that.
Scott, we want to thank you again for your public service. We wish you well in the upcoming election. And I'd ask my fellow members if we could thank Scott real quick.
Thank you.
Turn it back to President-elect Jackie.
Yes, I echo my gratitude, Congressman Perry. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. We know this is a particularly challenging time, and we are so grateful that you felt it's important enough to be with us today. So thank you. As you know, as our practice, we like to donate a book to a local school or a youth program in honor of our speaker. Congressman Perry signed the book plate that will go into You Are My Friend, the story of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood by Amy Reed. And we will donate this to the YWCA York. Next week, our program will be back to being all virtual, sadly, but we'll be back here again in October to do another round, as Mike had mentioned, with Eugene DePasquale. Next week, it'll be Angela Dorman from Spirit Trust Lutheran. She's going to talk about the changes implemented due to COVID-19 at Spirit Trust Lutheran Assisted Living and Nursing Home. President Ann's closing song for today is It's a Wonderful World by Sam Cooke. Rotarians, this adjourns our meeting.
So you can tell.